Well, cool, man. And I guess that's kind of a part of where I want to start. Again, thanks for taking a minute out. And I want to begin with surviving the pandemic, the last 3.5 years. How did you get through it and how did it change you?
Yeah, for me being in tech, it was interesting because we're used to being in the office, and so is at the leadership level, right? And it's when you had to work from home, I had already done that, right? Especially mobile traveling and such. And I think I think the adjustment was maybe not just being around team members and stuff like that, but you know, it's very interesting because you begin to manage all of this, these differences and uh, find different ways to move through the limitations, right?
Yeah. So, I know you're a systems engineer and I know that you're in tech, but let's get to the crux of what you do. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. And one of the
Mhm.
kids is curious and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer them?
I build computers, right? If you just take the most basic computer, your iPad or your laptop, I focus on the hardware, on how all those components work together. So you can see the images on the screen, right? So you can interact with the smartphone, the tablet, the PC. I've actually even taught in Florida. It was um, it was a girls' home, taught some basic foundational computer skills and brought in some colleagues from the company I was at. And, we just uh, took an old computer and opened it up and, explained all the different components, right? And just the basics of how a computer works. So I would really just lift up the keyboard and say, this is your entry point, right? Whether it's a phone or a tablet. And, those signals go into the computer, move across the memory, the board, and into the CPU. And that's this square looking thing in the middle of the board. And, when you have output, that ends up on a hard drive or some sort of SSD or some sort of cloud device, where, depending on, you know, what we're discussing. But yeah, I would start at the very basics.
Yeah. So, what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
I liked motorcycle racing.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you?
And I raced BMX.
Okay.
I had a motorcycle. I didn't quite get that far, but I raced BMX growing up in Southern California. My dad was a machinist, so very early he taught us how to, work with electronics, how to weld, how to braze, how to solder, how to take a bike apart, put it back together. Just basically do all our own maintenance.
So, is that where the fascination with technology came in? Did it kind of, were those the seeds that grew into this?
It really is because from there I went into ham radio and CB radio communications where I was putting antenna systems together at home and lifting them off the side of my house and these great big powerful systems and modifying ham radios to operate at CB radio frequencies so I could get more power and output
Yeah.
because usually CB radios have a limitation of 3 to 4 watts, sometimes two. Ham radios can go to the hundreds and thousands of watts. So yeah, I think it really just started from there, the fascination of how electronics work.
Yeah.
And I was able to talk all over the United States and all over the world on those communication systems at a CB radio level. And the interesting thing was here's this 12-year-old kid talking to all these adults all over the world, right? And it just the fascination and the simplicity of it, and knowing I built the system for the most part that allowed me to do that was really interesting.
So, what in our lifetime of going through technology, I mean, we've gone through, I mean, we're probably in the similar age category. We've seen an incredible amount of technological growth. What do you think has been the most breakthrough brilliant, genius, life-changing thing that we've seen in our lives?
That's a good question, and it's pretty diverse, right?
Yeah.
It could span a great amount of technology stacks. But if I focus on where I've been operating in the past 21 years in high performance computing and supercomputers, it's the development of low latency, high speed networks to move data, like InfiniBand, for example. That it's right now InfiniBand is operating at 400 gigabits a second, and it's moving up to 800, and you can move very large volumes of data. But more than that, I would say cloud adoption, right? Because some of those supercomputing centers, they're very focused on premise and what can be done on premise. But I think it's the development of cloud and the advancement in the software that runs these advanced algorithms to solve larger and larger computational problems for science and engineering.
Yeah. Who's been a hero for you in your life? Who's inspired you to be who you are?
I think it's my dad,
Yeah.
right? Because he was always working something hard, and he kind of refused to pay anyone that for something that he could do himself. And it still goes on to this day. Instead of buying a boat, he makes a boat or he builds a boat. We were walking through his garage the other day, and he was looking around. He's like, you know, all this stuff, you're going to have to think about what you're going to do with it one day.
That's interesting. So, if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now and spend some time with them, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
Probably Elon
Yeah.
Musk, right? And it's just the advances in technology he's brought to the forefront, and not really thought about all the naysayers, and just said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure out a way to do it. I'm going to go all in and develop these various technologies. I used to live near SpaceX in Florida on the coast, and I could hear the rockets go off and just walk out the door and see them, right? In knowing about space and some technologies that I've been involved with. And yeah, I think that would be a good conversation.
I saw that over the pandemic. It was around May. We were out in the back, had a bonfire. And of course, we had no idea what was going on. As far as we were concerned, the metaphor was the world was on fire. We didn't know when the
Yeah.
pandemic was going to stop. And then all of a sudden, all these little diodes of light start going over me. And I'm like, I finally get to see the spaceship. Like all of those kid close encounters dreams were coming true. And then I did a search, and it was his SpaceX, and it was crazy because it all arced over and they all just eclipsed on the horizon line. It was wild.
Yeah, growing up, I lived in the Mojave Desert north of Los Angeles, and you had Edwards Air Force Base out there, you had Lockheed, you had Rockwell, the Skunk Works projects. That's where the stealth bomber was created, the stealth fighter. The SR-71 was retired right down the street from me. And just watching all of that, and working with telescopes in the very early portions of my life, I just think that outer boundary in space is super interesting, and it takes tech to do it right, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly does. So, um, what is the motivation for you every day? What is it that gets you out of bed? What is it that gets you to be who you are and to do the things that you do?
Yeah, I really I wake up early to spend time on myself for self-development, and health and fitness is a big part of what I do. But when it comes to tech and what I do in the area of supercomputing, it really drives me to help the scientists and engineers develop the answers they're looking for when they're running their algorithms on these really big systems. Because it's number one, if it's oil and gas, it's finding hydrocarbons and how do we get them to the subsurface for use. If it's EDA, electronic design automation, it's designing chips for a smartphone, or your basic compute system. And just seeing the answers and the results and the excitement that comes from putting these large systems together, that's what drives and motivates me. And a lot of the times, people get a little too hung up in the hardware and the big data centers and all the flashing lights. And it's really not about that. It's about the science and the engineering, the results that the systems produce. Not
Yeah.
that they're always right results,
Yeah.
but it's also exciting in some way too, and it drives me because these big systems break, and when they break, it's at scale. It's at a very, very large scale and becomes a very complex problem. And you're sitting with the best minds in the world to resolve some of these issues, right? And at the end of the day, the scientists and the engineers just want to know, hey, when can I run these jobs again? When can I start producing some output that possibly leads us in a direction that we can make a decision on something, right?
So are you a Mac or a Windows guy?
At home, it's Mac. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I didn't realize till later on that Macs were made is difficult. Like I started in Windows. I think a lot of people did. And I always thought that the Mac OS and the whole architecture of it was strange. But that was actually made for the end user, whereas Windows machines were made for accountants and people that were doing more hardcore stuff. And I didn't
Yeah.
realize that till later on. That was wild.
Yeah. Yeah. On the basis of Mac OS is Unix.
Yeah.
You can all of the same commands you run here. And of course I use the Mac for different reasons at home, but it's the foundations of Unix, right? So it's those what all supercomputers are basically run on these days, Unix
Yeah.
and Linux. Yep.
Absolutely. What's been one of the best success stories? One of the proudest things you've been involved with as far as being a professional?
I would say when I was in upstream oil and gas, I helped a big major oil and gas company, Shell Oil in this case, find oil shell in Northwest Colorado and developed all of the high performance computing systems that allowed the reservoir engineers, geoscientists, geophysicists to properly model the subsurface and bring those hydrocarbons to the surface to analyze, possibly put in production. This is all R&D. It was one of the biggest R&D projects Shell E&P had. We're spending maybe 25% of the world Dutch budget globally, which is quite a bit when it comes to $100 billion company. But all of those systems were developed by me and supported by me, right? And that helped really catapult the R&D effort. And the systems kept growing because, what happens with supercomputers and a lot of these models is as soon as you build a big enough system to solve a particular modeling problem where the computations can run properly and in a fair amount of time, the scientists and engineers will produce those answers to leadership, and leadership will go, hey, that's great, but can we add this and add this? And what if, these different scenarios? And that makes the model bigger, right?
Yeah.
So you got to go back and produce a bigger hardware system, right? And then there's a trade-off where, okay, now we have all of this compute capability, but the software has a limitation, right? So you got to go work with the software engineers, the computer scientists, to really say, hey, here's the kind of architecture we have. What can we do with the software to, increase the capability?
Yeah. What's been the best advice you've ever gotten?
I would say it's around leadership. You don't need to be in a leadership role to be a leader. You can lead as an individual contributor, but be focused on your work. Listen, involve people in the decision process. You don't own everything. You bring the right people to the table and you give everyone at the table a seat and a decision-making capability, right? Because oftentimes you'll see these scenarios where the best minds come into the room and then it's one or two people talking the whole time. right? It's like, well, why do we need all these people then, right?
Yeah.
You don't. If there's two people talking all the time and they have all the answers, well then, yeah, that's a short meeting
Yeah.
between two people, right? But it's giving everyone at the seat. And the feedback I've always gotten because of that is, hey, you make me feel like I'm valued, right? You make me feel like the information I'm putting forward, my ideas, my strategy, my thoughts on different things is important, and I'm in the room for a reason. So yeah,
Yeah.
that would be it.
So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom you've gained in your life. What advice would you impart on that young version of you?
Yeah, I would say learn leadership earlier, right? And that is so important because you can lead from the front, you can lead from the rear, you can, you know, include people as much as you can, but it's also your communication style that needs to be developed. And it's, because you're going to get the on the job training. It's some of the best training you can get, right? It's not necessarily at the university level. Um, it's gonna be, I would say, diving into communication, learning that well, and being able to articulate what your thoughts are.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm someone that's pretty fair, right? But stern as well, right? When there's time to get work done, we got to go. When there's a decision to be made, we can't, sit around and wait on the perfect scenario, right? You just have to make a decision based on the information you have. And I would say that's important because it's so many times, across corporate America, companies get hung up in, I don't have enough decision, or I don't have enough information to make a decision. And it holds a lot up.
So if anyone out there, let me ask you this. Sorry, I had a little
Yep.
glitch with the light for a second. So let me ask you this. You seem like an adventurous spirit. If we get off the phone and a time machine pulls up in front of your house and you can go anywhere in time and see one event in human history, where are you going to go? What would you love to see?
Oh, it's interesting. I would say, development of this first space shuttle,
Yeah.
you know, and learn about that. And why was it important to NASA? Why was it important to the government? You know, at what point did it lead to us pulling back and, on our space exploration? But yeah, I would lean towards something that's not so far in the future because I just, talked about something that's past tense, right? In terms of using a time machine, I would go back a little bit and then leverage and learn how can we use that, information, or how could I use that for the future? You know, there's a point in time where in Afghanistan, the military didn't have quick access to supercomputers in Afghanistan once imagery was coming in from the troops out on the front lines. So there was a blimp flying around Afghanistan with the supercomputer in it. So those images would go up, process, push back down to the command centers, right? So it could be, make as much real-time decisions as possible. So yeah, I think something in that category would be good for me.
So if anyone wants to reach out to you, learn more about you, anything about your world, where can they go? Where's the best place?
Yeah, you can find me at Erik L. Scott on LinkedIn, Erik L. Scott, ERIK on Instagram. And yeah, happy to chat with anyone about technology and supercomputers and leadership and life in general.
Right on. Erik, this has been great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your story. Have a great 2024.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Take care.